All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the end of the week. You've made it if you're slugging through the work week. It's been a busy week here at the Call Sheet Daily Podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Kevin Smith. Welcome to another show. And wrapping up the week that follows the NFL draft is always kind of a crazy one. Tons of football to cover. We've had a great week here at our podcast. Some really good guests on. Tuesday, I had the CEO of the company, Ken Wisniewski, on, and we talked about how do you determine value in the NFL draft. Wednesday, I had an excellent young football coach on here, Garrett Lucas, head football coach at Rancocas Valley High School, storied program in Southern New Jersey that has produced NFL players like Franco Harris, Irving Fryer, Alonzo Spellman. And Coach Lucas was on talking to us about the screen game, building a screen game into your offense. And then yesterday we had a journalist on, Mark Tribble, excellent journalist in our area here. And he talked about covering the game of football. And it was interesting to hear his take on the game of football, a different perspective. So great guests this week. You missed any of those shows, catch up on them. And today we're going to put a bow on the whole NFL draft. We're going to wrap it all up today before we move on next week. And we're going to talk about 5 things we learned from the NFL draft. 5 things we learned. This is not a winners and losers list. This is not a draft grade list. My gosh, if there's one thing that I can't stand, it's draft grades. I won't get on that rant right now, but the idea of assigning grades to young men who have never even gone to an OTA with their new teams is, I think, one of the dumbest things that we got going here on the covering football landscape. But what did we learn? What did we learn from the NFL draft? Things that we can take away. Let's start with this. We learned that this year, maybe this is a standalone, maybe this trend won't hold, but we learned that this year, NFL teams were not willing to overpay for quarterbacks. And that's interesting because that kind of bucks a recent trend. Overpay could be the wrong word. Maybe the word is they weren't willing to spend extremely valuable resources to get a quarterback if they weren't convinced the QB was worth it. I know that's kind of nuanced, but if you look at recent years in the NFL draft, teams seem to be willing to move significant resources or take gambles on quarterbacks very high in the draft simply because they needed one and because the need to have a franchise quarterback is so important at the NFL. Teams were willing to say, hey, I don't know if this guy is going to be the guy, but we need the guy. So let's go get him. If you look at recent drafts, you've seen guys like Trey Lance, who barely played college football because of COVID, missed an entire year, and played at North Dakota State. He went 3rd overall in the draft. 2nd overall, 3rd overall, yeah. Zach Wilson, there were a million questions about whether or not Zach Wilson was NFL ready. He was a kid who grew up in a small town in Utah and had really never left the state, went to BYU, and the New York Jets drafted him. And so suddenly that kid who'd been in that small town environment his whole life was now going to go to the Big Apple. That seemed like a bad fit from the start, and it was. You saw the Colts take a flyer on Anthony Richardson, who'd only started 12 games in college, had a career completion percentage of 54%. They drafted him number 4 overall, despite the fact that there were a lot of questions about whether or not he was NFL ready. Even a little further down the first round, the Steelers probably reached for Kenny Pickett in 2022. Most people had a 2nd or even 3rd round grade on Kenny Pickett. Pittsburgh took him 20th overall. Why? They needed an heir to Ben Roethlisberger. And yes, in last year's draft, there were 6 quarterbacks taken in the first 12 picks, and most, if not all of them, look like they might work out. But this year, teams were unwilling to do that. It was said to be a quarterback draft where you had one guy who everybody thought could be a franchise guy, Cam Ward, and he went first overall to Tennessee, and then everybody else was willing to wait. And that's interesting because teams like the Giants, Cleveland, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, they all needed quarterbacks, and they all passed on quarterbacks with their initial pick. The Giants ended up going up back into the late part of the first round to get Jackson Dart, but they could have taken a quarterback third overall. They didn't. Teams did not overpay for quarterbacks. And I think the reason is because, while we've said it wasn't a particularly deep crop for quarterbacks this year, there may be some lessons learned from recent drafts. If you swing and miss on a QB in the first round, it really sets you back. Because not only do you miss on a first round pick, but you still now have the question of, where are we going to get a franchise quarterback? And that is a position that is not exactly readily available. The dearth of franchise quarterbacks makes it so that if you swing and miss, you really set yourself back. So this year, for 1 year at least, teams were not willing to overdraft quarterbacks. Second thing we learned, this is also quarterback related. The transfer portal was incredibly important, or has become incredibly important for quarterbacks in particular. It's become very important across the board in college football, but it is increasingly important for quarterbacks. And here's why. When you look at all of the quarterbacks taken in this year's draft, there were 14 selected. 12 of those quarterbacks were FCS guys. FBS guys, Division I. Forget the FCS, FBS nonsense. I'm old school. To me, it's Division I, and then it's 1AA, and then it's 2 and 3. There were 2 1AA quarterbacks taken. Tommy Mellott from Montana State, Cam Miller from North Dakota State. Both those guys played their entire careers at those respective schools. But for the 12 Division I quarterbacks selected in the draft, only one of those guys played his entire career in college at one school. You want to guess who it was? I'll pause. Who was it? Which D1 QB of the 12 taken in this year's draft was the only one to play his entire career at just one school? The answer, Jalen Milroe, Alabama. The other 11 guys all played at 2 or more schools. Like Cam Ward played at 3 schools. Tyler Shugg played at 3 schools. Some of these guys played it. Everybody else played at least 2. Why has the transfer portal become incredibly important for quarterbacks? Because quarterback is a singleton position. There's one of them, and you can only play one. Running back is a singleton position. Most teams only have one running back on the field at a time, but they shuffle in multiple guys throughout the game. They use more than one back. The idea of like the workhorse back who gets 95% of the carries, that has become pretty antiquated. Most teams split carries. Same thing at tight end. Predominantly a singleton position, but multiple guys share the role. Not true with quarterbacks. So if you're an FCS quarterback, I messed it up again. I'm not using that term anymore. If you're a D1 quarterback, you're playing at a Power 4 school and you're not the starter, or if the situation there, even if you are the starter, isn't one that you think is going to be conducive to your draft prospects, use the portal. If you're not starting, why are you going to sit? Right? I mean, we saw Quinn Ewers do that. Right? Quinn Ewers did not believe that he was going to have the opportunity to be a starter at Ohio State, and so he left and went to Texas. Ended up getting drafted. Will Howard didn't believe that the situation at Kansas State was conducive to his draft prospects. He left and went to Ohio State, wins a national championship, gets drafted. Back in the day, you had to suck it up, right? You basically had to sit and earn your starting job. Or if you did transfer, it generally was you went to a lower division, right? You went from, hey, I'm the third string guy at Penn State, and I'm going to leave and maybe go to Villanova. But the new reality is you can use the portal to find a home at another big time D1 school. So the portal has become incredibly important for quarterbacks. They move around until they find the situation that suits them best. Here's the third thing. We've talked about quarterbacks with our first two so-called lessons learned. A third one is this: the passing game is still king in the NFL. I mean, there was a shift that took place in the league about a decade ago, maybe a little further back, where the pass became more and more emphasized. And we have really seen that to be true in the NFL draft. Over the last 4 NFL drafts, here are the position groups that have been chosen the most in round 1, where your best players are being taken, your most premium picks. This is the 2022 to 2025 draft. We have seen 22 edge rushers taken, guys who get after the quarterback. We have seen 21 offensive tackles taken, guys who protect the quarterback from those edge rushers. We've seen 21 wide receivers taken, guys who catch passes from those quarterbacks. We have seen 18 defensive backs taken, the guys who cover the guys who catch the passes from the quarterbacks. And we have seen 12 actual quarterbacks. Those are the most common position groups that have been taken collectively in the last 4 drafts. 22 edge rushers, 21 offensive tackles, 21 wide receivers, 18 D-backs, 12 QBs. What do they all have in common? They are most closely related to the passing game. Now, what about the other position groups? 12 defensive tackles, 9 interior offensive linemen, centers and guards, 4 running backs, 4 tight ends, 4 inside linebackers. When you think about DTs, interior offensive linemen, running backs, tight ends, and inside linebackers, well, what are you generally talking about there? You're generally talking about the run game. So we have a grand total of, I'll do the math real quick, 45, 66, 96 pass-related positions taken in the first round in those 4 drafts. And we have a grand total of 33 predominantly run-related positions. The passing game is king. You want to succeed in the NFL, you better be able to throw the football. And we're seeing significant investments in players who are related to throwing the football taken in the first round. Here's another thing. Number 4. What else have we learned? Number 4. The Power 4 conferences are firmly in control, particularly when it comes to that first round talent. And while this has predominantly been true historically, it has never been as true as it is today. In the last 3 years, 91 out of the 95 players selected in the first round have come from the Power 4 conferences. What are the Power 4 conferences? The ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the SEC. 91 out of 95 first-round draft picks, including 30 out of 32 this past year, have come from the Power 4 conferences. Why are the last 3 years instructive? Because 3 years ago, college football realigned. And that realignment added powerhouse teams to the Big 10, to the Big 12, to the SEC, essentially killed the Pac-10 or the Pac-12, whatever it was at the time, and really condensed the talent into these 4 conferences. In the last 4 years, the only player, 3 years, I'm sorry. In the last 3 years, the only players selected in the first round who weren't from these Power 4 conferences were Ashton Genty from Boise and Gray Zabel from North Dakota State this past year. And then last year, it was, I can't remember, but it was 30 out of 32 the last 2 years. That's incredible, man. That is a huge concentration of talent. Now, why has this not universally been true? Because if you go back to a couple years ago, you got guys coming from Northern Iowa, Toledo, Chattanooga, North Dakota State, Tulsa, first round picks from all those schools as recently as 2022. But conference realignment has shifted the balance. And so the Power Four conferences are firmly in control. Last thing, what's the fifth thing we learned from the NFL draft? I think we knew this, but this NFL draft really reinforced it. The NFL remains the king of kings on the sporting landscape in America. Over 200,000 people turned out live and in person to attend the first round of the draft in Green Bay. 200,000. That first round was watched on television by 13.6 million viewers, which is up 11% from 2024. And this is astounding to me. The first round of the NFL draft on Thursday night got higher ratings than the NBA playoffs. So here's the NBA, which is a long season. I don't even watch the regular season in the NBA, but I watch the playoffs because the playoffs is like real basketball. They're actually trying. The NBA has now reached the showcase of its season, the most important part of its season, and it loses in the ratings to the NFL draft. I don't know if that's a damning comment towards the NBA, or I kind of lean more in this direction. It's just an indication of how unbelievably popular pro football is in America. Next year's draft will be in Pittsburgh. My goodness. I mean, Green Bay is a small town, out of the way, not easy to get to, so tiny that they don't have parking to accommodate people. Residents of Green Bay were renting out their driveways to fans who wanted to attend the draft for $100 a parking spot. Come park in my driveway, pay me $100. And you're 2 blocks from Lambeau. You can walk there. Point being, Green Bay wasn't the easiest place to hold the draft, and they still got 200,000 people. What's it going to look like in Pittsburgh next year? The Fans First Network, we're going to be there. We're going to be there. So the NFL, man, remains the king of the sporting landscape. And I think we learned some really interesting aspects about that from this recent NFL draft. All right. That does it for me for this week's shows here at the Call Sheet Daily. Again, if you missed any of the ones earlier in the week, I think we had some really good guests on. Hopefully you'll catch up with those. Until Monday then, when we resume, hope you have a great weekend, and I'll catch up with everybody then. Take care, everyone.